It's now my pleasure to introduce Robert Toomey, Regional President of Webster Bank, and he'll offer some brief remarks and introduce the mayor. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, David, for your kind remarks. Let me say on behalf of Webster Bank how very pleased we are to once again sponsor the State of the City Luncheon. I hope that you have time to talk to some of my fellow Webster bankers who are sitting right in the table in front of the podium here. Three of them may be very familiar to you. Anna Dyer, former valedictorian of her class. Anna gets mad when I pick on her like this. Former valedictorian of her class at New Bedford High School, who runs all of our small business efforts in Eastern Mass and Rhode Island. In the small world category, it turns out that Anna was the guide at Harvard when Mayor Mitchell went for the tour while he was still in high school. Carlos DeCunha, who is our market leader in the region and president of the Prince Henry Society. And Jeff Paliuka, who works with Anna and who is a new member of the Chamber's Board of Directors. All of the Webster people here today and those working on our local branches are deeply devoted to serving the needs of this community. In just the last 3 months, we've closed more than $21 million in loans to a variety of local businesses. I should also mention that Webster made national headlines in the Wall Street Journal and subsequently on the ABC Evening News last fall for our mortgage modification program. Since that program began in late 2008, we have modified more than $200 million in mortgages for distressed homeowners, enabling approximately 1,200 of them to remain in their homes and avoid foreclosure. Over the course of this year, you'll see our name on sponsor lists for Summerfest, the New Bedford Symphony, Downtown New Bedford, the United Way, the Boys and Girls Clubs, the Community Foundation of Southeastern Mass, and of course the Chamber of Commerce. I am especially honored that the Chamber has asked us to again participate in today's State of the City address. The City of New Bedford is a very important customer to Webster Bank, and so it is my distinct and sincere pleasure to introduce the 38th Mayor of New Bedford, John Mitchell. John's roots are deeply embedded in the city. He was born in New Bedford and hails from a local fishing family that included his grandfather, Alexander Mitchell, whose name is inscribed at the Seaman's Bethel with all other local fishermen lost at the sea. After graduating from Harvard, John went on to law school at George Washington University. From there, he was selected to the prestigious Attorney General's Honor Program and became one of the youngest federal prosecutors in the country. 3 years later, John returned to Massachusetts to practice law, ultimately returning to the role of federal prosecutor as an assistant U.S. attorney in Boston. Many of his cases were national and of local importance, including his tenure as the prosecutor on the fugitive investigation for Boston mobster Whitey Bulger, and his prosecutions of the perpetrators of the Buzzards Bay oil spill and Exxon Mobil for an oil spill in Boston Harbor, just to name a few. In addition, John served his country for 6 years in the Army National Guard as an officer in the Field Artillery and the Judge Advocate General units. He and his wife Ann are the parents of 3 young daughters, and he volunteers as coach for the girls' soccer and softball in New Bedford's youth leagues. On behalf of the Chamber, please join me in welcoming the Mayor of the great city of New Bedford to deliver his first State of the City address. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable John Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. I think the desserts have arrived, so please have at it. Well, let me begin by thanking you, Bob, and thanking Webster Bank and the other sponsors of our event today for your generosity and your support of the city. And let me thank the Chamber for putting on such a great event, and thank the United Fishermen's Club for hosting it. Great job, as always. Today marks the 80th day of my administration. And so some might contend that offering an assessment of the state of the city at this point may be a little premature. After all, I just got here. But my own view is that whether it's 80 days or 800 days, the citizens of this city deserve to hear about where their city is going. Across America, cities face many of the same primary challenges that we confront right here. Growing jobs and effectively competing in the global economy, keeping our neighborhoods safe and thriving, delivering efficient government services, and building a first-rate school system. In the next 50 years, many cities, lacking the resources or the know-how to solve these problems, may well fall by the wayside, abandoned like larger versions of Western ghost towns, having lost the economic rationale that propelled the growth of businesses in the communities around them, whether it was a riverfront for mills or a train stop along an important railway. These cities will cease to function in the absence of enormous infusions of state or federal aid. And frankly, that aid ain't coming. Cities simply go away when they don't offer people a good reason to choose to live there. Modern-day Detroit is a tragic example of this. As I have said before and will say again and again and again, I believe firmly that New Bedford is different. New Bedford isn't going anywhere. Despite its share of challenges, New Bedford has assets that other cities lack. These assets position us well to remain a city of choice in the future and become an even more desirable place to live. A deepwater port, extensive highway and freight rail capacity, and major educational, civic, and cultural institutions. That's what we have. These things really do matter. And so does the story that we have to tell about ourselves. Our story is unmatched by any mid-sized city in the United States. As the capital of Yankee whaling, New Bedford's culture was forged by the most American of industries, at whose heart was the audacious undertaking of using wooden boats to hunt the largest creatures in the sea with hand weapons. This made New Bedford the fascinating place it remains today. But just because we're dealt a better hand than many of our so-called peer cities, doesn't guarantee success. We need to capitalize on our assets if we are to become a city where people who could leave instead choose to remain, and where others who could be somewhere else choose to come. To become a city of choice, we have to work hard on what matters to people in the long run: schools, safety, economic opportunity, and efficient and above-board government. My administration is pressing forward on all of these fronts. Building a city of choice begins in our schools. New Bedford won't return to its place as one of America's great cities unless we build a great school system. It's not news to anyone at this point that our school system is not where it should be. For many New Bedford families who love our city and its way of life, the school system has become a deal breaker. Concerned about the performance and sometimes the safety of our schools, many parents with children have lost confidence and are leaving New Bedford. Worse still, hundreds of our city's children are dropping out of school. Each and every one, a personal tragedy. This situation is intolerable, period. As a first step in confronting our collective problems in schools, I held 3 public forums in recent weeks to discuss the state of our schools. My hope for these sessions was to offer everyone the opportunity to weigh in, to raise ideas that they may not have been comfortable raising in times past. With an open dialogue about our schools, the public can be confident that there's no hidden agenda. The response to the forums was something to behold. The sessions lasted nearly twice as long as scheduled, and the crowds grew larger on each occasion. Meanwhile, comments poured in via email and regular mail. The The observations of teachers were especially helpful. In our education system, the classroom is where the rubber hits the road. Teachers, many of whom are parents themselves, are uniquely positioned to assess what is working well and what is not working well. The level of engagement in the process shows that New Bedford's residents are just as concerned about their schools as the residents of any affluent community. New Bedford wants great schools. Parents want great classroom instruction, like the kind Simone Bourgeois, last year's Teacher of the Year, seated at the head table, has been delivering to students in our system and at C-Lab for over 40 years. Just ask Simone, and she will tell you what parents want from their kids' schools. The observations at the forums and in the letters to my office came from a variety of perspectives. Parents shared their individual experiences with their children. Teachers, current and retired, offered their thoughts about classroom instruction and school operations. And local business people, like many of you in this room, weighed in on the performance of the school system as an organization. While the ideas varied, there was one consistent thread, one unifying theme across all voices: change. The overriding message was that our schools can and must do better. The status quo is not an option. We owe it to our children, and we owe it to our city to alter the way we deliver education here in New Bedford. This is not to say that everyone agrees. We heard from some that nothing should change because we're already on the right track. Any expression of doubt about whether we are in fact on the right track is dismissed out of hand by these folks. The opponents of change in our system have a right to express their opinions. There are no restrictions on what anyone could say at these forums. I believe that their opinions are honestly held, but not all opinions are of equal weight, and some just don't measure up to reality. One cannot look at the state of our schools and reasonably claim that there is nothing to fix. While there are pockets of true excellence in our school system, it is not news to anyone that our school system ranks at the bottom of the state in terms of MCAS scores and the four-year graduation rate. 2 of our schools have been placed on the state's list of the worst performing schools. We just learned last week that if the school year ended today, more than a third of the freshman class at the high school would not pass on to the 10th grade. 1 in 3 is failing English. 1 in 3 is failing math. 1 in 4 is failing social studies. 1 in 4 is failing science. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. And the facts show that we have a long, long way to go. Now, there is no doubt that our city's demographics play a part in student performance. It's hardly news that less affluent children from unstable homes tend to do less well in schools than their peers, here and everywhere else. For this reason, some of the blame for our lower test scores is rightly laid on federal and state housing policies that indirectly foster the concentration of poverty in cities like ours. But demographics are only part of the story. The reality is that we haven't done as well as other Massachusetts cities that face similar challenges. Among the state's so-called gateway cities, New Bedford is at or near the bottom in terms of MCAS scores and the four-year graduation rate. The reality we must acknowledge is that the deficiencies in our schools are in part of our own making. Not all the numbers are new, but what is new is what happened less than a month after I took office. The state has threatened to take over our school system if our school system does business in the same way that it's doing and does not change dramatically the way it goes about that business. Dramatically is their word, not mine. A state takeover would be a huge black eye for our school system and would devastate our city's reputation generally. It would make it far more difficult for my administration to attract businesses to our city and would give credence to those who believe that New Bedford is not a desirable place to live. Astonishingly, as the clock ticks down on the state's threat, some still cling to the status quo, questioning the seriousness of the threat as though the state were in the business of bluffing. To dismiss this need for change in light of the facts and in the face of a state takeover is to play Russian roulette with our schools. It is not a position grounded in the facts of our system's performance, but stems from an irrational resistance to change. I believe in following the facts wherever they lead. And in this case, I believe the facts demand that change must be broad and deep. Successful school systems have a culture of respect and high standards of personal conduct, where student safety is not even an issue. That positive learning climate is a fundamental prerequisite to educational attainment. Good behavior, as all of you parents know, starts at home. And many parents in our city have failed to step up and do their part. To those parents, I say this: your child is being provided a free education by hardworking teachers. You can't turn a blind eye to your child's absences or ignore the fact that he watches television all hours of the night and then blame teachers when your child is not performing in school. Let me be clear. Teachers are not the problem. We need a system that supports teachers in their effort to establish order and cultivate learning environments that engage children. This is possible only when teachers are empowered to maintain discipline by the administrators and the leaders of the system. For far too many teachers in our system, support from above is inadequate. We need a system that has teachers' backs, and teachers should know that they have a mayor who has their back. Above all, we should demand effective leadership at all levels of the school system. Effective leadership is the foundation upon which any highly functioning organization is built. If leaders are not performing to expectations, then they should be held accountable. In recent weeks, questions have arisen about the present leadership in the central office. Alarm bells have sounded over the inability of the central office to produce an acceptable turnaround plan despite months of intense guidance from the state, or to communicate effectively with principals concerning the development of the plan or its implementation. More recently, school committee members had to demand high school failure rate data from the central office that cast doubt on our prospects to significantly reduce the system's dropout rate. These developments raise questions about the central office's ability to identify the problems in the system and to successfully execute solutions. Our school system and our city is entitled to better. Change, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes is not easy, and it always feels hardest before the commitment to change is made. But change must be embraced if the status quo only makes matters worse. Our school system is full of talented teachers and students. Let us embrace the change necessary to unlock their potential for our children's sake and for the city's. Since taking office, my administration has focused intensely on creating well-paying jobs. Our efforts have included support for existing businesses, such as American Pride Seafood, which through a tax relief package offered by my administration will expand its North Terminal operations by upwards of 50 people. I am proud to fight for our fishing industry against unfair regulations. As the mayor of the #1 fishing port in the United States, I see it as my job to advocate for the industry, just as I did yesterday at an industry rally in Washington. The fishing industry contributes over $1 billion to our local economy annually and embodies the cultural soul of a region that has gone to sea for centuries. We are also building on our cultural assets in the city. The vibrancy of our downtown was on full display last week for our record-setting crowds during the half marathon. Citizens can expect new businesses to come online in the weeks ahead, including a wine boutique on Purchase Street, along with the continued renovation of the former Standard Times building. Our efforts will make the queen of downtown, my friend Elaine Lima, very, very proud. We're also working to improve the appearance of our business district so that we attract more business. Our skilled laborers in the Department of Public Infrastructure, under the focused leadership of Ron LaBelle, will be putting the finishing touches on Wings Court, which will allow cafe seating and a more interesting urban nightlife. Right around the corner, my administration will begin converting Custom House Square into a park. Like Post Office Square in Boston, it will be a welcoming green space in the center of a business district, framed nicely by the surrounding buildings. It will be a magnet for office workers and tourists alike. We're going to make absolutely sure that we maintain adequate parking for patrons of our restaurants and shops. That's very important. But we are going to give downtown what it has always been missing, a central gathering space. Efforts to improve the look of our neighborhoods are underway elsewhere. Most notably, we are about to begin work on Phase 1 of the Acushnet Avenue International Marketplace project, which will transform the entry into the north end from Route 18. The construction will catalyze business investment that is already underway. While we are improving the look of our city as a way of attracting businesses, our strategy to bring new businesses here focuses, as it must, on our city's natural competitive advantages. The greatest of these, of course, is our waterfront. And the largest piece of the waterfront development puzzle is the South Terminal project. From the day I took office, this project has been and will continue to be on my front burner. I believe that the prospect of building a modern marine terminal on our waterfront that would support America's new offshore wind industry and unlock the city's potential as a hub of international trade is by far the single most important business opportunity for New Bedford and the surrounding region in my lifetime. This is no exaggeration. Consider the experience of Bremerhaven, Germany, an old fishing port on the Baltic Sea that fell on hard times in the 1990s as a result of tightening European fishing regulations. About 10 years ago, with the advent of offshore wind in Europe, Bremerhaven was selected as the assembly point for offshore wind farms consisting of hundreds of windmills. With an industrial waterfront, proximity to wind farm sites, and a workforce comprised of experienced seafarers and waterfront laborers, Bremerhaven was a good fit for offshore wind. And offshore wind has been good in the meantime to Bremerhaven. Very, very good, it turns out. In the 7 years since Bremerhaven got into the business, the industry has generated over 2,000 jobs, and it's still growing. The industry has electrified the local economy, both literally and figuratively, filling shops and restaurants and enabling the municipal government to balance its books and to build new schools. The same thing can happen here. Offshore wind farms are coming to America. It's inevitable. They've been in Europe for 20 years and are already under construction in China and in other countries. For a nation that seeks to reduce its carbon emissions and dependence on oil produced by unstable and hostile countries, the Obama administration has made clear that offshore wind is central to America's long-term energy strategy. So where in the United States will offshore wind farms be located? Right here in our own backyard. A full 25% of America's wind reserves are located in the area of the ocean just south of Martha's Vineyard. It's one of the most consistently windy places on the planet. The United States Department of the Interior has designated this area for thousands of windmills that will power large swaths of the northeastern United States. And this is where New Bedford comes in. Along the southern coast of New England, we are one of the few deep water ports with the industrial space to stage windmills, each costing millions of dollars, and ship them to their placement sites. We have highway and rail access, and our residents have the seafaring and manufacturing skills that the industry needs. From the industry standpoint, New Bedford makes perfect sense. But we're not the only ones in the game. Ports in Rhode Island and Connecticut, and perhaps elsewhere, will vie for the same lucrative business. Whether we get a leg up on these ports and just how quickly offshore wind projects get moving are matters that we here in New Bedford can't entirely control. Federal and state regulations, the price of wind power relative to oil and gas-generated power, and the availability of affordable financing for wind projects are among the many factors that may dictate whether and when New Bedford will reap the benefits of offshore wind. For our part, we need to make sure that we are making the case to the public, to opinion leaders, and to decision makers about the South Terminal Project's role in serving offshore wind farms. And making the case is exactly what I have been doing. Since taking office, I have met with numerous state and federal officials and business leaders to explain why the South Terminal Project ought to go forward. It's not just about New Bedford. It's in the Commonwealth's broad strategic interest that this project be realized. Signs are that the project is moving in the right direction. The project is now budgeted in the state's capital plan, and the Environmental Protection Agency and the state are making progress on the necessary permits. Thanks to the strong support of Governor Patrick and Lieutenant Governor Murray, the state is partnering effectively to push the project along. Citizens of New Bedford should know that we will do everything in our power to seize the unique opportunity that offshore wind represents for New Bedford. Job creation is not possible, of course, in a community that is not safe. While most of New Bedford's neighborhoods are safe, a select few have alarmingly deteriorated in recent years. In these places, a sense of social disorder and danger prevails to an extent unlike anything we've seen before in this city. Throughout my campaign for mayor, I made clear my belief that the first order of business in public safety is to ensure that the relatively small numbers of individuals who are responsible for a disproportionate amount of crime in our city are removed from our streets. And the surest way to accomplish this is through prosecution in the federal system, where jail time is longer and more certain. Beginning before I took office, I pressed my former colleagues in the federal law enforcement to focus their attention on our city. I believe that these efforts in time will bear fruit, and that our city will not return to the days when it was a blind spot for federal agencies in Boston. Close coordination between the city, these federal agencies, and our district attorney, Sam Sutter, will permit our residents to sleep easier at night. Support from the City Council is also important to crime fighting, and in this way, I'm pleased to join the efforts of Councilor Brian Gomes, who has consistently been a strong voice for Neighborhood City throughout his tenure on the City Council. But we also need to focus on the root causes of crime and deal with the seeds of disorder: garbage, graffiti, rundown properties. Toward this end, as I promised during the campaign, we will soon launch a task force aimed at improving conditions in our neighborhoods. The task force will be drawn from departments across city government and will be headed by a former state prosecutor whom I appointed as an assistant city solicitor. The task force job is simple: to enforce the city code, especially in places where code enforcement has been lax. Certain neighborhoods have suffered in great part because of a few absentee landlords that have purchased tenements out of foreclosure, disregarded housing codes, and allowed the properties to become run down. They have turned a deaf ear, these folks have, to law-abiding neighbors who have complained again and again and again. The task force that we're assembling is meant to deal with this problem directly. The task force, however, is a short-term measure. In the long term, we need to incorporate the task force into the regular operation of city government so that consistent code enforcement becomes a permanent feature of what we do. This may require some changes to the city code that enhance the city's ability to collect fines and to demolish abandoned properties. In my administration's efforts to develop a long-term plan to address problem properties, I am grateful for the insightful contributions of City Council President Steve Martins and Councilor Joe Lopes, to whom I know these matters are extremely important. Our work to build a better New Bedford requires thoughtful decision-making regarding city finances. Every new initiative, every new policy, every new idea are only as possible as our ability to fund them. By now, it's not news to anyone that we live in an era of diminished resources. 4 years after the financial meltdown in 2008, government at all levels is still struggling. As our hardworking city employees who have had to endure layoffs and furloughs will tell you, New Bedford is no exception. The prospects for next year's budget are more of what has become the new norm. The days of healthy revenue growth are not in sight, and state aid remains ever uncertain. Nevertheless, the cost of operating government is not getting any cheaper, and growing our rainy day fund is a need awaiting attention. As I stated from the beginning of my campaign, we must strive to spend taxpayer dollars more wisely and to deliver more effective and efficient government services. We have no choice. The city has already asked too much of taxpayers, including commercial taxpayers, of whom many are in the room. We need to scrutinize every activity of city government and ask, what are we paying for? Do our priorities match up with the resources available to us? Thanks to the collaborative efforts of the City Council, the city can now offer a competitive salary to attract a top-notch chief financial officer to help answer some of these questions. This is a significant step. By applying careful scrutiny to budget decisions and undertaking long-term financial planning, a CFO will ensure that money is allocated more precisely according to need across all city departments and that it's spent more carefully. Finally, given the continuing uncertainty of revenues and state aid, we need to have the discipline to keep adding to our stabilization fund whenever an opportunity presents itself. Our stabilization fund is like a savings account. It's a cushion against contingencies we cannot predict. Right now, with a balance of $4.4 million, it is hardly a cushion at all. We must strive to build up this account at the earliest opportunity so that we don't handicap the city in the future when the unexpected happens. It's the responsible thing to do, and we'll be glad we did it on the day we need it. Good jobs, safer neighborhoods, efficient government, and high-performing schools. These are the areas we must master if we are to reestablish a quality of life that draws people to our city and keeps people who might otherwise go elsewhere. In our quest to become a city of choice, New Bedford is pressing forward on all fronts. Our journey will not be without obstacles. It won't be easy. It's not easy. The skeptics may say that mid-sized cities like ours cannot transform themselves. But this city, the city of New Bedford, is tough, it's resilient, and it is determined. We will not lower our sights and accept less. We have abundant strengths and the will to make them work for us. We will become a shining example for the rest of urban America. I look forward to the days when our children and grandchildren will say, I live in New Bedford. Why would I want to live anywhere else? Thank you. God bless you. And God bless the great city of New Bedford.
Great job, Mayor Mitchell. That does conclude our event today, so I'd like everyone to drive safely and enjoy the nice day out there.